55, then it will be 15 millivolt. Yeah. So normally there is about the range where the stimulus is strong enough to cause a membrane potential to depolarize to about -15 to -20 to reach the threshold potential, then action potential will happen. Okay, so now if you give a stimulus that is less than the able to depolarize the membrane to the threshold potential, then they are known as sub-threshold potential, which means they are not able to change the membrane potential from, let's say, -70 to only -60. There's about 10 millivolt, negative 10 millivolt or positive 10 millivolt. Then it's not able to reach the threshold potential of about -50. Then this is known as sub-threshold potential, sub-threshold stimulus, right? So what happens if you give a supra-threshold stimulus, which means that now you are giving a much stronger than the sub-threshold stimulus, than the threshold stimulus, so it's supra-threshold. What will happen to the resting membrane potential? Anyone want to try to answer?
Become excited?
Yes. What happens to the resting membrane potential? Will you give a supra-threshold potential will cause the membrane potential to exceed the threshold potential? Anyone? No one.
Sir, please repeat the question.
Yes. The question is, if we give a supra-threshold potential, will the membrane potential exceed the threshold potential?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So Hussein says yes. So which means that if this is the resting membrane potential of 70, so we give a sub-threshold or we give a supra-threshold stimulus. So we give a stimulus which is stronger than the usual. So you will expect that the, let's say here is -50 millivolt. Yeah, this is millivolt. And this is 0, and here is, let's say, 30. So what will happen is basically now you give a stimulus here, the membrane potential is going to, but it cannot exceed the threshold potential. Even though no matter how strong you give, it will only reach the threshold potential. Why? Because by the time it reaches the threshold potential, it has already able to stimulate an action potential. Okay. So no matter how strong the stimulus that you give, you can only cause the action potential to occur at the point of stimulus. So if the neuron, if you stimulate the receptors, so basically you give a supra-threshold stimulus, you can only stimulate here and it only causes an action potential that is going to be transmitted down through the axon. Okay. So it cannot actually cause to exceed the threshold potential because by that time, the action potential has occurred. So it never exceeded the threshold potential because you are going to cause an action potential to happen on that neuron. Is that clear? Have any questions? No questions? You are clear. Okay, which means that you cannot cause another action potential to occur, and the cell or the neuron can only generate one action potential, no matter how strong the stimulus you give. As long as that stimulus is already exceeded the threshold potential, so it will never generate an action potential which is more. So you only generate one action potential. Okay. Now, if you give another stimulus after it has already come back, so you get another action potential. Okay, you give again after that. Okay, this basically generate to shows that the action potential is basically a all or none law. It can only generate one action potential per stimulus, which means that the stimulus must exceed threshold potential. Okay, if you go sub threshold potential, no action potential occurred. But if you give supra threshold potential, it also only generate an action potential. Okay, so this is the concept that is happening. So it means that because of this threshold, so the voltage gate for sodium has already opened. So the cell has already depolarized. So the cell membrane potential cannot exceed the threshold potential. But after that, it's basically a membrane potential change due to action potential, not due to greater potential. Okay, so this is the characteristic also known as all or none law, referring to that basically once it reached the threshold potential, okay, at this point, all the sodium gate, voltage gated sodium channels open. Once it stimulate here, that means all the sodium gate basically open and it allowed the cell to basically depolarize towards the equivalent potential for sodium. But it never reached the equivalent potential for sodium, which is basically 60, and it managed to actually reach about 30. Okay, what happens there? Why? Yes. Okay, the membrane potential for action potential can only reach about 30 millivolt. Because we know that the equivalent potential for sodium is around 60, but it never reached that 60 point. Question is, okay. The first thing that I answer is basically one, the threshold potential has caused all the sodium gate to open. So as the sodium gate open, all the cell has actually, all the membrane potential has already depolarized to about 30. By this time here, all the sodium gate will close. All voltage gated sodium channels or sodium will close. Once it closes, then the voltage gated potassium channels will open. Problem with voltage gated potassium channels, it only opens slowly. Voltage gated potassium channels, this channel opens slowly. That's why sometimes they are known as delayed rectifier. Once potassium gate open, now the cells start to repolarize again. Okay, because it opens slowly and it will basically close slowly. That's why it has an undershot known as hyperpolarization at this point. Is there any questions that you want to ask?
Doctor,
Yes.
if there is an undershoot, is there an overshoot?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Undershoot is because the delay closing of the potassium channels. So if you look at the cell, okay, the closing of that gate, okay, is slower. So you allow basically potassium to basically leak out, right? But the sodium potassium pump is keep on pumping to try to maintain that membrane potential, okay? So it, as long as potassium gated channel, voltage gated channel has not closed, so it will basically go down. So it's going to basically give you a more negative charge. So it's going to actually cause to go down like maybe 75, so about 5 millivolt. And this is hyperpolarized, so we call them undershot. Is that right? Or overshot? This is undershot. That means it's go lower than the resting membrane potential. This is the resting membrane potential. So it's actually going lower. And then once it closes, okay, once it closes, once this potassium channels, gated channels closed, then the membrane potential is maintained back by the sodium potassium pump. Is that okay, Hussein?
Yes, doctor. And I have another
So,
question, a little misunderstood, a doubt. So,
okay.
when the cell is at the membrane potential is at rest, the potassium sodium pump is active so that it can maintain the resting membrane potential, right? So when depolarization occurs, is it still open or it closes, the sodium potassium pump?
It never closes. It keep on working unless it's been blocked by chemicals or drugs. So it never closes, which means that all our sodium potassium pump in the cell, all cells, basically they never stop working day and night. Okay.
Okay.
So this is basically very energy intensive to maintain the membrane potential. We have discussed I think many of the classes. Why is it important to maintain the membrane potential? It's very energy intensive. That means the cell use a lot of energy to try to maintain the membrane potential. So what is the significance of that? To maintain the resting membrane potential in all cells. Anyone? Come on, guys.
Can you repeat the question, doctor?
Question is, as Hussein says, why is sodium potassium pump, will it stop during depolarization? I say no. So it becomes very labor intensive or very energy intensive to basically maintain, and it basically pumps, forever until our last day. So that is basically our last second. So it will keep on working. Even after our last second, it will keep on working until depletion of ATPs. So what is the significance of the cell to maintain the resting membrane potential? Why the cell has to...
Is it important to maintain the muscular and nervous system, right? Because the nervous system must function properly to maintain.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So basically, if we are referring to excitable cell, then that is very important because that is mainly for communication. But even non-excitable cell, that is also for communication. Do you believe that?
Yes, doctor, because I have to know the normal first, right? So they know how to communicate.
Yes. So the cell must maintain a resting membrane potential. So if there is any change to the resting membrane potential to the cell, that is a message. Okay, the significance is for intercellular communication. If no resting membrane potential, the cell will not communicate, will not be able to communicate in a way. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, doctor.
Yeah. So that is very important. So basically, I hope the action potential is being generated. Yeah. And we have actually talked about the summation. So you must be able to do the activity 9.15. Okay. Then we look at activity 9.16. So we talk about threshold and subthreshold. Now we talk about temporal summation and spatial summation. Okay. So if we come back to the same, now we look at we talk about the first one, the sensory neuron, about pain. And we talk about if you are bitten by mosquitoes or even if your finger have a cut. Okay, the same thing. You see that basically this neuron or the graded potential can be summed. So they are either spatial summation or temporal summation. Okay. The difference is just the time and space. So that is the difference. But remember that they can be summed. Yeah. And I am going to use the same explanation about EPSP and IPSP. So what happens when you have this pain sensation coming in without the others being activated yet? So it's going to feel the pain as the information is transmitted to the brain. Okay. Now what happens when now you start rubbing, so you increase the IPSP to about 40 millivolt. So we say that now it's going to inhibit the transmission of pain. Okay. So this is basically how it works. But let's say if you decided, okay, now we do not want this IPSP to happen, maybe only 10 millivolt by rubbing. Now the C neuron is also going to cause an IPSP of, let's say, 30 millivolt, which is stronger when you take, let's say, from your brain. Your brain decided now, I want to inhibit the pain sensation from coming. So you think about not feeling the pain. So in a way, you are inhibiting the pain. So now you increase the IPSP. And this is what we call central inhibition. So the information coming down. And all this is going to summate at the neuron D. Okay, so if you're going to summate the neuron D, now the depolarization that happens, if it happens, there's change in membrane potential will be equals to 20 plus minus 10 plus minus 30, right? So this will be basically going to be minus 20 millivolt. That happens in this neuron D. So minus 20 millivolt. Okay, now you have a resting membrane potential of minus 70 millivolt. If you add that together, now you get minus 90 millivolt. So with this, basically, it have a very strong central inhibition to inhibit the pain from going through the interneuron. So there will be no action potential that is transmitted. So you will not feel the pain, or basically you feel less painful. That's how our system works in the brain. Okay, this shows that the greater potential of a neuron can be summed. It means it can summate. Okay, the only thing is either they are the temporal or they are the spatial. Yeah. Okay, if this one coming down and few seconds later this one coming down, then it become a or this one coming down a few seconds or few milliseconds after the neuron C, then it become a spatial summation. Okay, or it decided only just one. That we don't talk about neuron C. We talk about neuron B. Initially, it sent one impulse followed by the next impulse together in a short time. So you call that as temporal summation. Is that okay? Which means
So,
that you start rubbing. Yes.
Temporal summation can be hyperpolarization and depolarization.
Yes. In greater potential, it can.
It
Sorry,
can either
please.
be hyperpolarization or depolarization.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
So the summation can be either temporal summation or even spatial summation. They can be either temporal, or they can be either hyperpolarized or depolarized. Depends on the neuron that send the impulse. If the impulse is basically causing an IPSP, we call them inhibitory, then they are inhibitory, they are hyperpolarized. If they are EPSP, they depolarize, then they are depolarizing the cell membrane. So either way they can. And they can sum. So summation doesn't mean that it has to be depolarized only, no. Or it has to be hyperpolarized. Is that clear?
Yes,
Doctor,
doctor,
can you
thank
please
you.
repeat?
Okay.
Hello?
Repeat again.
Yes.
Okay. Repeat again, yeah. Which means that let's say neuron A is going to send an impulse, and this impulse now because you have once the mosquito bite, it only not just send one impulse, it can send multiple of impulses. So this actually can be summed, yeah. But we just look at one. Basically, it's going to send one impulse, then you have this pain sensation that's going to go through. Okay. What happens if you send another one? Then you start to feel more painful. Okay. So this is what we call summation. Yeah. Now, if the send of these impulses is very short time, immediately another one coming, so you call that, yeah, the temporal. You will based on time. But if you decided to just only send one info and then wait for some time, so there is a time space. So you call that spatial summation. Okay. But now we say that neuron doesn't the greater potential doesn't just summate based on one neuron. The neuron D are being innervated by many other neurons. Now you have either IPSP or EPSP, so they can basically sum the summation. So if every one of these neurons that is coming down will then become, what will be the net effect? Each one will be added together and give you the net effect of, let's say, if they are inhibitory, so you have a inhibitory effect. So there will be no nerve transmission to our central nervous system. Okay. So for summation, you have to know that summation doesn't depend on the depolarization or hyperpolarized. They can be either one of them or both of them working together to give you the end result at the neuron. Is that clear? Yes? No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the importance of this representation, so you can work on the activity 9.6, looking at spatial summation and temporal summation. And I don't really much look at the difference between them because basically they are able to sum. The only thing is looking at the time and the space, then you can differentiate them. But when you apply the temporal summation and the spatial summation, then you can work on activity 9.17. Either you use this model as an example, or you can come up with your own examples to work on it. Is that okay? Okay. So I move on to the next page. That is page 44 on change in membrane potential when stimulated. Now we're looking at the action potential. Yeah. So I'm going to wrap this off. Okay, so we have already know by now that the action potential that can occur. Okay. So this is minus 70 and this is minus 50. Okay, so when stimulated, so you are going to reach a threshold potential. Let's say you stimulated here, so you are going to reach a threshold potential with a threshold stimulus, and you are going to cause an action potential. That's going to happen here. Okay, so what happens when you reach the threshold potential? We have agreed that all the voltage gated sodium channels are open. Okay, then it's going to reach about 30 millivolt. Okay, by the time you reach about 30 millivolt, then you have your voltage gated potassium channels that is going to be open. Okay, this one open, and your voltage gated sodium channels have closed. Okay, but compared to sodium gate and potassium gate, okay, potassium gate, only some of them are open. That's why the repolarization takes some time. So it will be slow repolarization back. So compared to the graph here, you can see that during depolarization is almost perpendicular, okay, as straight as possible. So if I can draw them as straight as possible, it will be very straight, okay. But during repolarization, the curve is slightly above, take longer time. So I need to rewrite them away again and just make it as close as possible. So you will have depolarization, which is basically almost perpendicular, and then repolarization will be a bit, yeah, this way. So this will be the D and this will be the repolarization. Okay, so you can work on activity 9.18. We talk about reversal of the membrane potential. Reversal is mainly looking at repolarization. Once the membrane is depolarized, as we say, in a greater potential, okay, you can have greater potential and then repolarization. Okay, which means that if it does not reach, this is minus 70, minus 60. If it does not reach, this is depolarization and this will be the repolarization. Which means that in the greater potential, there will always be a reverse membrane potential after depolarization. Do you know what ion channels that is working on it to get the cell membrane back to its resting membrane potential?
Sodium potassium pump.
Yes, the sodium potassium pump is working to basically reverse the membrane potential back to the resting membrane potential. Yeah. So these are some of the names that you can work on. Okay, so I just move on. Basically, you understood that. And the peculiarity of this sodium voltage gated sodium channels. Okay, it's a bit difficult to draw, but I will try, because basically it's okay. So if this is the channels, so when it opens, basically it opens, allow sodium to basically come in. Okay, so you have the activation gate and the inactivation gate also, that basically also then opens, then only sodium can come in. Yeah. So the change in the conformation of the ion channels, the voltage gated ion channels, that allow, okay, the sodium to basically diffuse in. So here is, they are fast acting voltage gated channels. So we call them fast acting. Yeah? Once threshold, all the voltage gated open simultaneously. So just imagine the cell, okay, you have all the gates for sodium basically opens simultaneously. Voltage gate, yeah, this is the voltage gate for sodium. So sodium will basically go in very fast and basically depolarize the cell membrane. That's why it makes almost perpendicular, 90 degrees out based on the graph. So all the sodium basically rush into the cell. Why does the sodium rush into the cell when the gates open?
There is abundance of sodium outside the cell.
So you say it's due to chemical gradients?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that the only one that attracts sodium to influx into the cell?
Also concentration gradient.
Which is also the chemical gradient. There's the concentration gradient. Is there any other things also drive the sodium to basically rush into the cell?
Electrical gradient.
Yes, the electrical gradients. That means inside there is more negative, and it's going to attract the positive charge of sodium to basically rush into the cell. So you have three things that basically happens. You have chemical gradients, which is your concentration gradients. You have the electrical gradients. Okay, the third one is basically the electrochemical gradients. Yeah. Even though they are basically separated, but this also, the combination effect basically help to basically move sodium into the cell. That's why the rush, once the permeability increases because of the opening of the fast voltage gated sodium channels, so all the sodium basically rush into the cell, and they are driven by these three forces, basically the chemical gradients, electrical gradients, and also electrochemical gradients. Okay, so that allowed the cell to basically depolarize the cell. So if you turn to page 47, yeah, so you look at here, we actually numbers them, and what happens if happening at here, you say here 1, here will be 2, and this is 3, and then you have the number 4, which is your here. That's been going on. So what happened during the stage 1? Okay. So you can read on the activity, the figure 9.17. Okay, the stage 1, what will happens? Then you have to look at stage 2, what will happens, and all the other stages. Yeah. So I leave you to basically understand that, to read on that. Yeah. So I move on, unless you have questions. If not, I believe you understood how the changes in this action potential that occur. Okay.
Excuse me, doctor.
Yes. The same.
On that diagram in page 47, there is
Yes.
a yellow line, and then there are two other lines. Why?
Okay. Okay. Do you look at the iron lines. Okay, the yellow lines is basically referring to the the yellow line. I hope I can have green. The yellow line is basically referring to the, because they are quite close, okay, to the action potential line. Is that okay? Just basically is about here. Yeah. So the yellow line is basically referring to the, this is the equilibrium potential for sodium. Okay. And you can also say this is basically the permeability for sodium. The permeability increases when you start to depolarize some of the gate. Okay. And this can be due to the voltage gate or mechanical gate or voltage gate during the first stage here, before reaching the threshold. What chemical gates is, or what voltage or what gate, ion gates is open during this stage, during the gradient potential? Anyone? Is it voltage gated ion channels?
No, it's chemical or mechanical.
So it's either mechanical gate, voltage gate, or chemical gate, or sometimes they know as ligand gate. They are the same. Yeah, ligand gate. Okay, so these are the ones that actually open to depolarize the cell, to reach depolarize the cell, to reach the threshold. Is that right, Waka?
Yeah.
So these are the one that the gate. So it depends on the receptors that have mechanical gate or chemical gate. The receptors can only have one type of gate. If they are chemicals, then they are chemicals. If they are mechanicals, then they respond to touch or change in pressure or change in the the physical change stage. Yeah. If they are chemical, then they change to any chemical changes, or can be ligand gated like acetylcholine, okay, or glycine or glutamate, depends, or GABA. Okay. So all this basically is going to affect the gates to open, and they depolarize the cell membrane to reach a threshold potential. Then only here you will get all the fast acting voltage gated sodium channels to open. That's what the yellow line is actually referring to, the permeability for sodium. Is that okay? You see?
Yes, doctor. Thank you.
Then you have the other line, which is the green line. Green line is basically, I can't have the green line, so I will just try to draw the green line here, which is basically closer to the resting membrane potential. And we know that basically this is the potassium equilibrium potential. Yeah, this is basically the equilibrium potential for potassium. So for potassium, so they are actually the permeability. Okay, why does it go outside the action potential line? Because it's opening after the peak. Assuming that here it opens only after the peak of the action potential, then only the permeability increases. But because it opens slowly, okay, that's why the repolarization phase is slower as more sodium rush out. So the repolarization, that's the permeability start to decrease. Once it start to open, it start to close. So some of the open, some close, some open, some close. Okay, so that's why the permeability start to decrease. It never go higher than the action potential. Yeah, is that clear? Okay, so I assume that you understood the graph, so you can work on it. Then you look at the mechanism on page 48 on mechanism of action potential, which basically explains in this chart. You can actually explain them. Yeah, and at this stage, what happened during the peak? At the peak stage, basically all the voltage gated, all the fast voltage gated sodium channels close. So here close. Okay. Then you have some of the potassium gates start to open. Some, yeah. Not all, some of them open. Then as you go down, some of them start to close. Okay, so you can work on activity 19.19. Okay, then you can look at the chart on a page figure 9.18, looking at the membrane potential, and it's try to basically put you to be able to visualize them and what happens when there is a changes. Okay, during the phases
Doctor,
of yes.
sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
It's regarding the wait, the inactive gate and the what's the inactivation
Yeah.
gate and also the activation gate, right?
That's right.
So that means both of the gates have to be inactive in order for the entire voltage gated channel to be able to be stimulated by any voltage.
Yes. Okay. For the sodium to be able to get through the voltage gated channels, sodium channels, the sodium channels, voltage gated sodium channels have two gates. One is called inactivated gate and the other one is activated gate. Okay. In a way, it's like just one, basically two gates, and make sure that the activation gate and deactivation gate have to be open so sodium can come in. Okay. Then we have to look at this how during that here basically all the gates is open, which means that allows sodium to come in. That's why sodium is able to rush into the cell. Okay, by the time it reach here, most all the voltage gate they are closed. Either activation or inactivation gate they are closed. Okay, then as you start to repolarize, some of the activation gate might open. Okay, but it's not enough. So you need also that the activation and inactivation gate can be open later. So by the time you reach a certain level, okay, then you have both activation and inactivation gate can be open again. You have to give a very strong stimulus. Now, this is what we call supra threshold, which is about higher than the threshold. Then it can cause an action potential. So at this stage, then we look at either absolute or refractory period for the action potential to occur. Is that okay? Or did I explain too fast? Too far away?
Yes, doctor, I understood that completely. Thank you, doctor.
That's right. I prefer that you read yourself. If you do not understand, then I can explain. If not, I will just assume that you have read.
Because I actually read that, but I still didn't understand. So that's why I asked you. Thank you, doctor.
Yeah. Okay. So since you understood, so I just move on, and then we are going to see how action potential is going to be propagated. Yeah. So we are done with that. Then you can look at table 9.2, comparison between the graded potential and action potential. So by now, I believe you can differentiate between graded potential and action potential, right? Okay. No questions. But now I'm going to ask you a question. Is that okay, or you want to ask first before I ask you? Okay, no question, I will ask you. Okay.
Excuse me, doctor.
Yes, Cassandra.
Doctor, what is refractory period?
Yeah, I haven't go there yet. I'm going to go there after this. Is that okay?
Okay, doctor.
Yeah. Okay. So I ask you, looking at the graded potential and action potential, so can the amplitude of the graded potential varies?
Yes.
Yes, it can vary, which means that it can be very high, it can be very low, or can be lower than the membrane potential, which means that basically it can go much lower. Yeah, so it can be very low, so it can vary. Now, can the amplitude of an action potential varies like a graded potential?
No.
No. Why? What is the justification? Anyone? This is going to be your objective questions, then it will be your justification.
Is it because of the all or none policy?
Yes. The action potential is basically based all or none law. It only has one amplitude. It can only reach up to about 30 millivolt. This is the height. It cannot go higher than that, okay? Or it cannot go lower than that. So the action potential is only going up to about 30 millivolt. That is the amplitude. You cannot have an action potential, just somewhere here if I can draw, okay? You cannot have an action potential, okay? This high, and then the next one, you come out this way, or the next one, you go out higher. So this cannot happen. So the 30 is the cutoff point. Basically, it will reach there. It cannot have one type of cell might have this or the other one might have that. Then your cell might be confused with the message. Okay, it's clear. For action potential, amplitude is only one because it's all or none law. Why? Because once all the voltage gated sodium channels open, it only have one amplitude. There is no variation of many voltage gated open slowly. There is no such thing for an action potential because all the voltage gated sodium channels has already opened. So it has only one amplitude. Is that clear? Yes. Okay. Now I can ask you again. Can the group potential has frequency? Can graded potential has frequency? We know they can have amplitude because they are variation of depolarization can occur. Right.
So what do you mean by frequency?
Frequency. So you can have 1, 1, 1. So that is frequency. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say. Okay. Which means that which means that the graded potential has many different frequency. So it can have 1, it can have high, or it can have low. Okay. So it can change. This is frequency. Because its amplitude can change, depend on the stimulus. The strength of the stimulus. Right. So can graded potential has frequency? It must be. With frequency, then you have summation. So it's either temporal or spatial summation. That's why you have frequencies. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I ask you again. Can action potential has frequency?
No, it does not.
Okay. That is very important concept that you have to know. Okay, Hussein. So for action potential, you have 1. Okay. Sorry, they are supposed to be the same. So for action potential, it must have a frequency. Sorry, let's say this is 30. Let's say they are all straight 30. Yeah. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. For the neuron to integrate, it must have a frequency because if you have more frequency that is coming, so you will basically see action potential that is going to the nerve. So this is what we call frequency. So the faster or the more the frequency that is coming, which means that the action potential is more. So the cell know that either the strength, the stimulus is more, okay, or it have less frequency. That means the frequency coming down starts to slow down. So you have 1, 2, 3. So the cell can differentiate and says now the strength of stimulus is less. Okay, this is how our body's neuron or our body muscles or cell basically responds to that by interpreting the frequency. So action potential can have frequency. So the faster the frequency, the cell will interpret that the strength of stimulus is high. The lower the frequency, then the strength of stimulus is low. Is that okay? But that frequency cannot be summed. Okay, it cannot sum, so it cannot summate. You cannot have an action potential submit over to the next one. The concept is, why does the action potential cannot be submit? What is the reason behind? Or what is the justification? Anyone? Okay.
Can I
Yes.
try?
Yes, Walker.
I think because you say that the amplitude is constant, so if you have summation, then it would cause it to be less or to be more, which doesn't
Yes,
make sense.
that's true. Good. So that is just one. But if you look at the as we talk about the as we talk about this the channels, the channels is you have the activation and inactivation gate. So the channels itself is very important, because it need times for the cell to basically come back to an activation period. So it has that activation and inactivation. Yeah. So once they are inactivated, they need times to be activated. Okay. So what does it mean? So if you look at the cell of this, that's the neurons. So if this gate is activated, this is sodium gate activated, sodium come in, so this thing will just move down, right? But it cannot move back here because this is already inactivated. So here is going to close, so no sodium can come in. Okay, so the action potential only move one direction. It cannot move backward because the sodium gate need times to be activated again. Yeah, is that understood, or is it more confused?
Doctor, is this related to the refractory period?
Yes. Now we are going to that. Okay, it's also because of all or none law, or none. Okay, and also basically talking about the refractory period. Okay, because this channels, the fast voltage gated sodium channels will require time, and the time for it to become activated again. Okay, so it needs a resting period before it can be activated. Okay, and that time that refer to the refractory period, the time for rest. Just like us, after working so hard, we have a break. But I don't have a weekend marking your questions and your justification. So it took me almost all the weekend. So I don't have a rest time yet. Okay, it's okay now. So for the cell, or for these voltage gated channels, it need time for rest so that it can be activated again. And that time is actually referred to the refractory period. Is that okay? And also refer to all or none law, and it can only travel one direction, because the one at the back, after the action potential, after the potential change to forward, basically this is already inactivated. That's why the information cannot go backward. What is the advantage of this? What is the significance of this? Or why is it important that the voltage gate is inactivated and need times to become active again? Anyone? No. Okay. The significance is basically the most important thing. That's why if you look at the neuron, if let's say this is the receptor side, the neuron will basically only travels one way. You stimulate here, it's only to go this way. Okay, if not, the neuron is going to go back again. I mean, the action potential or the information is going to go back, and it's not going to reach the final destination if that is going to happen. So it's very important that the neuron only transmit information one direction, unidirection. Okay, which means that if you have if this is a sensory neuron, you go to a first order neuron, then you go to a second order neuron, then you go to the third order neuron, which basically arriving at the brain. Okay, second order neuron is the interneuron. Okay, and this is the sensory neuron. Okay, so the information will basically travel only one direction so that it can actually reach our brain for us to interpret. Then the brain will then compare to the perception and decide to send another neuron, let's say your motor neuron, okay, that is going to go down to it activates, usually halfway it actually go to another. This is upper motor neuron, okay, activating on your lower motor neuron, then only acts on the muscle. Okay, so this is how our brain sends the information going to the brain, then send back the information to our skeletal muscle or our smooth muscle to cause it to contract. And the flow of information is such that it's only unidirectional. That means it's only one way forward because of the characteristic of the voltage gated sodium channels. Are you confused? Are you clear? Or you have any questions?
Yes, doctor, we understand.
Yes, doctor,
Okay.
it's clear.
Good. So basically, it is very important for you to understand that. Then if you really are clear, then you look at conduction and propagation of the transmission of action potential. Basically says that the action potential can only go one way, unidirectional. That means it's either from the peripheral going to the center of the brain, or from the center of the brain going to the peripheral effector. Yeah, so it's always one directional. Okay, so you can work on activity 9.2, looking at the propagation of action potential. Then based on this, you must be able to explain that. And then you can work on the activity 9.21, looking at the domino effect of the action potential. So basically it's unidirectional. Yeah. Unless you have a question on that, if not, I will just move on. Then you look at significance of refractory period. Because of that, you will know basically that the membrane need, the ion channels, the voltage gated ion channels need a rest. So that's where you have the refractory period. Okay. So now what you understand by refractory period, Cassandra, are you okay?
Yes, doctor.
So when you talk about absolute refractory period, which means that no matter how strong the stimulus is, it can be super strong, okay? It's not going to stimulate the nerve, which means that there will be no action potential happens, regardless the strength. You know, whether how strong, triple strong or many times stronger, still is not going to cause an action potential, okay? That is very important because you need times to reflect. The same thing, when I ask you a question, I always give you some time to think about it before you respond. So you need time to reflect. Yeah. Then when you reach the relative refractive period, which means that some of the voltage gated sodium channels have already been activated, so it has already have enough rest, so it can be activated. Okay, but once it's activated, it's going to activate all the voltage gated channels to open for sodium. Then you can have another action potential. And usually that it will be slightly above the threshold potential. Okay, let's say the threshold potential is minus 50 or minus 55 in the graph. So it's usually about 5 to 10 millivolts, slightly higher than the threshold potential. So with a super strong stimulus, then another action potential can occur. Okay, that is how our cell then interpret that as a frequency. So if the frequency become more, action potential that is coming, the cell then refer that to the increase in strength of stimulus. Okay, so you can work on activity 9.22. Still okay? Differentiate between absolute refractory period and relative refractory period. Any question on that? Are you still with me?
Yeah, doctor. Yeah.
So far, I believe you can do that. And then the hastening of this, I think, is even much easier for you to understand now that you have already get the concept right. So you will be able to then look at the strategy to hasten the action potential. So now, why does our body system or our body our neuron want to basically increase the nerve transmission? Yeah. So by this time, you should be very clear now that they are important for action potential to be able to get to our neuron, to our brains to be able to interpret the result. Okay. What happens if there is a delay in the action potential that actually gets to our brain? Then there will be a lot of other consequences. So what does the neuron do? Okay. Yeah. So basically, it starts to basically has something. Basically, this is to prevent the. This is basically the myelin shaft. The myelin sheath actually is from glia cell, but don't worry about this. Basically, this is a supporting cell that forms insulation around the axon. So if the insulation is such that only voltage gate can be present at the node. So what is the advantage? If you have a action potential here, so the advantage is basically now the voltage basically going to saltate, okay? Rather than going to open one by one, which is the traditional, okay, unmyelinated axon, basically, it will be basically just transmitted down. And this is usually slower. And we know this is related to C fiber. They are usually unmyelinated. Yeah. Then if you look at A fiber, they are usually myelinated and they travel very fast because they are able to saltate. So it basically able to jump the action potential from one neuron to the next. So it's able to jump. This jumping effect is known as saltation. Okay, advantage, basically the speed. If you look at page 61, the A fiber, the speed now increased from this one. The C fiber, well, let's say, is only about 0.5 meter per second, right? Yeah, compared to the A fiber, which is 130 meter per second. So it's how many 100 times faster compared to the C fiber, right? If you have a cut in your hand, the first pain that you feel, the sharp pain, is transmitted by which neuron? Anyone? Have you have a cut on your finger when you're doing some work, or you happen to use a knife? You were sharpening your pencils and you happen to cut your fingers. The first sharp pain is due to the information transmitted by which neuron?
A fiber.
Yes, it's the A fiber because it's very fast. So the A fiber is the first one basically to transmit the information. That's why you feel the sharp pain. Then after that, you feel the throbbing pain, a croup pain. This is known as the croup pain. This is due to the sharp pain. It's transmitted by which fiber? A, B, or C? You have the B fiber also. Okay. It's transmitted by the C fiber because they are unmyelinated and they are usually very small diameter compared to the A fiber. They are large diameter. So the diameter of the neuron is important also for the transmission of action potential. So the speed increase with the larger neuron compared to the speed with a smaller neuron. Okay, then they are myelinated or they are unmyelinated. Okay, which means that The larger the neuron, the faster the speed of transmission. Compared to the C fiber, they are basically sending the crude pain. After you have the cut, then you feel the second pain, and this is the crude pain, and they are transmitted by the C fiber because they are usually smaller diameter neuron, okay? And they are unmyelinated, and they take longer time for the information, and usually they are the one that lasting the longest. Okay, so if you look at axon diameter, that means you can basically work on that. And I think I have already came to the end of that. But before I come to the end, basically, you have to remember another things about sodium, the importance of this sodium voltage gate. Yeah, this sodium gate, they are basically also influenced by the calcium content of the ECF. So if the calcium is low, okay, the gate will basically close slower. Is that right?
Yes, doctor.
Yes. So if there is less calcium that is present in the ECF, this gate is not going to close as fast as we talked about just now. So it's going to close slower. If it's closed slower, which means that now it allows sodium to come in. So it's going to keep on depolarizing the cell or the neuron, which means the action potential keep on being transmitted down the neuron. Okay. So this can happen to, especially when women giving birth and they have not enough calcium. Now it can actually cause here it given is basically due to prolonged diarrhea or even can be due to impulse that's going to the skeletal muscle, so it can cause tetanus contraction. Yeah. So the same thing, if let's say there is not enough of that, then you can happens. Okay. Then if there is potassium, that is also very important. Okay. So if you turn to the page about potassium, looking at the increase in potassium, what happens then? The same thing we really know. If the ECF has more potassium outside, if there is an increase in potassium in the extracellular, less potassium can actually leak out. Then the cell is depolarized. Right? Yeah. So we already know that if you have hyperkalemia, the cell are easily excited, or the neuron are easily excitable. If you have hypokalemia, more potassium actually leak out, then you can have hyperpolarized neuron, so it will be difficult to actually depolarize the neuron. Yeah. So you can turn to page 61, also basically explains that. So I leave you to read on that. Is that okay? Any questions? Did I go too fast?
Doctor, can you
Yes.
summarize the myelin sheath effect on the transmission speed?
Okay. The myelin sheath, the transmission is basically increase the speed of action potential. If you have myelin sheath, the speed fast. Compared to those unmyelinated, this is a naked neuron. The C fiber, basically they are naked, they are not myelinated. Okay, so they are considered naked. So basically the information transmitted will be slower. So it takes about 0.5 meter per second. So it's very slow compared to the A fiber, because they are myelinated. So the speed increased to 130 meter per second, which is basically almost how many? 200, 300 times faster than the C fiber because of the myelination. Second one, because of the diameter. The larger the diameter, the faster the speed of transmission. Here, the smaller diameter, they are slower transmission. Is that okay, Annie?
Yes, but doctor, I was referring to the jumping motion you mentioned.
Oh, the jumping motion, because only voltage gated sodium and potassium channels is present at the node. It's only present at the node. So what will happen if there's a action potential that is coming down? So you have your action potential. It cannot go here because there's nothing in between the myelin sheath, right? So it will basically jumps. So when there is a jump, so now the speed actually increases because there is only presence of voltage gated channels on the node. Is that okay?
Yes, Doctor, understood. Thank you very much.
Okay. So that means those that is surrounded by the myelin sheath, there's no voltage gated channel. So nothing happens here. It only happens, the potential change will be at the node. Okay. But it must be well spaced. The nodes, basically the nodes must be well spaced, not too far, not too close. Too far away, probably there will be no action potential being transmitted. Too close, it will also slow down the speed because it need to go step by steps, then it will be slower. Is that okay?
Yes, Doctor.
Yeah. So the myelin sheath must be well spaced. Yeah, well spaced within the right gap. So this is what the glia cell is able to do. The supporting cell is able to basically space out the node so that they are well spaced, that allow the saltation of the action potential to occur. Okay, I have done. So you can do your own concept map in the summary 9.24. So the summary has already been given. Is there any questions?
Doctor,
Yes.
and on the refractory period, there is the absolute and relative. Could you please
Yes.
elaborate on that? What's
Okay.
the difference?
During absolute refractory period, because no matter how strong the stimulus is, supra-threshold stimulus or triple or even many times double or triples is not going to cause an action potential to occur in the neuron. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And
Now during
relative
relative refractory period, usually is about -5 to -10 millivolts, slightly higher than the threshold potential. Usually around the range, about -5 to -10 millivolt. Then you give a very strong supra threshold, very strong stimulus. Then you can cause an action potential to occur, which means that the action potential that happens in the neuron does not require the cell to reach resting membrane potential. Then the action potential can be stimulated with very strong stimulus. Then this is known as relative refractory period. Why? Because some of the voltage gate has already been active. Yes, Hussein.
Yes, I've understood.
Yeah. So usually it's around -5 to -10 millivolt above the threshold potential. That is where when you give a very strong millivolt, then you can open up the sodium gate again. Then you can cause another action potential. That is what we call the frequency. So if you keep on stimulating the neuron, it will have to take a break before the next action potential can occur. That is the reason why action potential cannot be summed. Okay, because it has a resting time for the voltage gate, so it cannot be summed. Okay, so that is how our cell interpret the frequencies of the action potential as related to the strength of the stimulus. Any other questions? No? Okay, you are good. So basically, most of you are able to understand the effect of action potential and how it's going to go. So we are done. So I have received 117 response from the IRAD. So we have to look at the first questions. Is that okay? So I will just off the video. So we focus on sharing the looking at the first questions. Okay. Do you receive it? Yes. So which of the following is which of the following is an inappropriate location of voltage gate channels? We were talking about the calcium gate, but we did not mention so much about the calcium gate. Okay. And we say that calcium gate, I think I did mention that they are very important, especially at the pre-synaptic terminus of the nerve. No, I'm not going to use it. Okay, so which of the following appropriate location of voltage gate is not appropriate? So the answer that is given, looking at almost 42 of you answer that calcium gate on the membrane of the nerve terminal. Okay. I'll share the board again. For any exocytosis of a neurotransmitter, you must have a calcium gate at the nerve terminal. Why? So that this is able to transmit the neurotransmitter, so it can actually fuse with the membrane and allow it. So you must have this gate to be open, and this is the voltage gated calcium channels, and it's only activated by action potential, change in the membrane potential. Calcium enter and cause these vesicles to exercise their content. Okay. So is this appropriate location of the voltage gate? Yes or no? Is the location appropriate?
Yes, appropriate.
Yeah, it must be located there. If not, then it will not be happen. Then we talk about the the axonal. So you have the axonal, basically the potassium gate, okay, on the axon, and also the sodium gate. Okay, they must be located there so that it can actually cause an transmission of an action potential, or you can refer to leakage gate. That is also okay, but basically we're referring to the voltage gate, okay, that allow potassium to leak out and sodium to leak in. So they are voltage gate, okay, so they are appropriate. Now, if you look at the muscle, which we are going to do on this Thursday, right? Okay, and we know that muscle has sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, so where would there will be an increase in calcium? Where would be the location of the voltage gated calcium channels? Is it on the sarcoplasmic reticulum, or is it on the membrane of the skeletal muscle? Okay, if it's located on the membrane of the skeletal muscle, it's going to pump calcium out. So basically calcium is going to go out. So the content of calcium is going to be reduced. It must be also in the sarcoplasmic reticulum to store out the calcium. Okay, but if this one is too much, is losing, so the amount of sarcoplasmic storage of calcium will reduce. At the end, the muscle is not going to contract because it's going to lose too much calcium. Okay, and assuming that this is the T tubule that's coming down, that activates to allow calcium to come out. So basically, that is very important that the calcium channels or calcium pump that had to be located on the sarcoplasmic reticulum rather than on the membrane. So A is actually the wrong answer. That is the answer that is right, because it's not appropriately located on the cell. Is that okay? Only 30 of you managed to get that right. So what is the justification? Justification is the calcium gate must be located on the sarcoplasmic reticulum for it to be able to store calcium back after the muscle contraction. If it's located on the membrane of the of the muscle, then you're going to lose calcium. So it's not appropriate located there. Is that okay? No. Do you agree?
Yes, doctor, I agree.
Okay.
Doctor.
So the next questions. Next questions about the boy. Yeah. The boy steps on the tantet. So what will be the first event that occurred? So the first event that occurred. So if let's say this is the boy's, let's say the cell membrane is somewhere about here, the soma. So this will be the receptor. Okay. So the receptor, let's say the boy step on the tantet. Okay, that is going to penetrate. Okay, or it's going to be sensed. No need to penetrate. Basically, this is the skin. Okay, and it steps on the thumbtack. So if there is a pressure change here, what will open first? Basically, your mechanical gated sodium channels, right? So almost 55 of you answered that right. There is mechanical gated sodium channels is going to open first. Then you cause a greater potential change here, greater potential. Then it's going to be transmitted here. Then it becomes an action potential. That's going to be transmitted down to the axon. Rather than waiting for him to retract, that is already feel the pain. That will be take a bit longer time. Okay, by the time you feel the pain, then only it's going to retract the foot. Yeah. Then you have first thing, mechanical gated sodium channels open. Then only the voltage gated channels will open later. So the first one that is going to happen is mechanical gated sodium channels must open first. Okay, your justification, because this is the first one that is present on the receptors to detect the events, which is mechanical gated sodium channels. Is that okay?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah. So that is the reason. So this is what we want you to be able to justify. So for those who has answered your questions in the SAQ, in the mid-course, which I have finished marking, and I am going to discuss with the committee to release the result. And basically, all of you are doing very well. Most of you are able to give a justification, which I say must be from your own work, because if you copy-paste from the internet, the justification is not right, because most of the time it doesn't justify the reason why you choose the option right. Okay, if you search the internet, you will not be able to find the answers. Yeah, so some of you actually did copy from the internet and paste, and that's why it take me longer time to read your justification, because you give too many words for me to read. Okay, so most of you actually did very well. Some of you have been sharing your friends' answers. Okay, the problem is it's okay for you to share it, but you are not helping your friends. You are actually destroying your friends. So this is the ethical aspect. As a medical professionals, we have to be very ethical. When we do things, we have to be ethical. So if you are doing this like sharing with your friends, you are not helping your friends. You are destroying them. If they just copy paste the answer, then you are not helping them to learn. Okay, even though if they get wrong their answers, it's still okay, but do not copy paste. Okay, you are losing mark on that. The worst thing is the answer that you share with your friend is a wrong answer. That's the worst thing. So in the way, you are actually totally destroying your friends. You are not helping your friends. Yeah. So I have a few of you that actually do that, which I have trusted you not to on your video. And so from now onwards, every exam you must on your videos without any reason. So whoever did that, I hope you have realized your mistakes and do not do that again in the future. Because we probably, if the MCO is going to be extended again, which had extended until the 20th December, so our end of course is not going to be done now, next week. So it had to be carried forward until somewhere January or February. that's where we are going to do our end of course. And this time we will do it face to face. Okay? Any questions?
Doctor, last question from me.
Yes.
Is graded potential available in all cell or just the excitable cell?
Okay. So you look at it. Can graded potential be present in all cells? So you have to ask yourself, is there any voltage gated channel present in all cells?
Okay, I get it, doctor. I get it, doctor.
Okay, you get it.
Sorry, I was lost in so much information.
No, it's okay.
You have to
can
ask
discuss.
yourself.
Yes, Akash. Ask yourself first. Is the graded potential? Is the gated channels is present in all cell? Akash.
Yes, doctor.
Yes, it's present in all cell. What type of gated channels is present in all cell? Anyone? If it is present in all cells, so what type of gated channel is present? But in actual fact, not all cells have gated channels. Huh? But let's say some cell has gated channel. Yes, Waka.
Chemical or mechanical?
Yes, they are either chemical or mechanical gated channels. So that's where there is a graded change in potential. And this potential can open up your voltage gated calcium channels. If you open up voltage gated calcium channels, then the vesicle can cause exocytosis, like your beta cell. That can happen. Okay, so we say that all cells that are excitable, they must have a voltage gated sodium channels. Some cells they can have voltage gated calcium channels. That is okay for them to be able to allow exocytosis of vesicles. Yeah. Stay okay, Naki. Is that okay?
Yes, doctor, understood.
Yeah. So we are done. If you have any other questions, if not, I will try to release your result by this afternoon, probably towards the evening, because there's a lot to basically done. And after my meeting with the committees, then only I will release the result. Stay okay?
Doctor, actually I have one question about the finals.
Yes, sure.
Because behavioral science, general
Yes.
anatomy, and physiology will be held, is it in one time or one by one? And is there a break in between so that we can actually do our revision on behavioral and general anatomy?
Yeah. We will send your representative, probably Omar or Irma, but Omar will be there to discuss when we have a MCAC meeting. So we will see how we can basically come up with a timetable for the 3 courses to be conducted, the exam within the week. So generally there will be 1 or 2 days break between one exam.
Okay, doctor.
Yeah. Yes,
Thank
yeah. Sorry, any other things? Any other questions? No? Okay, my advice you